Okay, Matthew 23. Let's just real quickly, though, the book of Matthew, the first gospel of Matthew, was written to a Jewish audience. It's important to remember that because as you go through all the text of the book of Matthew, you want to understand how the writer is applying his writing to which audience, because it's tailored in a certain way so that they can understand it. And it's the reason why in Matthew chapter 1, you start out with that genealogy, because in that genealogy comes Christ. And they knew this because of the promise made to Abraham, as well as through that seed of David. David was very important in Judaism, and the Messiah was going to come through that line. And so you start off right there with that genealogy. But as we fast forward, Jesus has started his ministry quite a while back, and we get to 23. By chapter 23, there are a lot of people that are following Christ now from place to place. And it starts off here with multitudes that come out to see him. Because, in the very beginning, in 23, they are astonished by his teaching. In fact, in many places, it says that how they were astonished by his teacher, and they wondered to themselves, is this the prophet, right? You remember in Deuteronomy, what did Moses say about what was to come later? There's a question, sorry. What did Moses say about what was to come unto him?
A prophet, and he would hear all things.
Exactly. And Moses was the lawgiver, right? The lawgiver of the Old Testament, what we call the law of Moses. But Yahweh was Christ. Like unto Moses, he's going to be the lawgiver. And so here is the great teacher, the lawgiver, teaching them. And at this time, they need to start recognizing these things, and they need to start seeing these things, because this is the Messiah that's been promised to them. And as we know, many of them didn't really recognize that. In fact, in John 7:46, when those officers went to arrest him, they came back empty-handed. And what did they say? They said, "Never a man ever spoke like this man." Have you ever been around somebody like that spoke with great authority, that you're like, wow, this person really understands their subject matter? And Christ had that type of speaking authority, that great teacher, that they just couldn't even arrest him because he was such a great man, great teacher. You remember also Matthew chapter 5 through 7, the Sermon on the Mount. Sermon on the Mount is considered by many to be the greatest sermon ever given. And why is that? That's because the great teacher gave it, right? Christ gave it, and it's filled with just so much wisdom in there that it's considered the greatest. Let's see. So this actually, there are 5, if you see on there, what's called 5 speech sections, or some people call them discourses. Sermon on the Mount is the first one. Matthew chapter 23 through, I think it's 25, is the last speech section. Now, the speech sections are important because Jesus does a lot of teaching in these sections over here, okay? There's a lot of sermons in these things. And in 23, much in the other parts, same as in the other parts of Matthew, Jesus takes on the Pharisees. And now that's an important thing to understand and to know, because if you put yourself in the shoes of Jesus at that time, Jesus is coming at this time when there's a lot that's evolved from the time of Aaron. When Aaron was that first chief priest there with Moses, all that time has passed, including those 400 years of the silence. Jesus has come in the fulfillment of time, and things have changed a lot. And we're going to see over here the hypocrisy, because this chapter addresses the hypocrisy of the Pharisees, okay? But it also has a lot of lessons for us in this. But when you address the hypocrisy of somebody, people can take those things very personally, right? And when you get to positions of authority as they did, or presumed authority as they did, and somebody comes to take you on like that and challenges you intellectually, challenges you on something that you should really know well, and that is the scriptures, you're going to be upset about it, right? And these Pharisees are going to be challenged over here. So in this section over here, this is probably what is said to be sort of the most scathing rebuke of the Pharisees. So Jesus really gets down to the core of it and really goes hard on them in terms of this thing. He can get really personal with them and really challenge them. But in the same time as challenging these leaders, saying you are not leaders, he's also teaching the people the correct way, because the leaders had the responsibility of teaching the people. There wasn't, we can go to a bookstore now and buy a Bible and get a good one, and you can read it for yourself, right? And you should, by the way, you should all have a copy of the written word, because on a side note, all this digital stuff with apps, can words and phrases and things be changed in those apps without you even knowing? Absolutely they can. You need to get a copy and keep a copy with you and use that and not be so reliant on the apps, because in the apps, they can change phrases and make translations different. So get yourself a written copy of the word. So this is one of the most, like we said, most scathing attacks on the Pharisees. And Jesus is going to challenge them, and he's going to have this series of what we call the woes. Okay, there's going to be sort of 7 woes that he addresses over here. So let's take a look over here, and then see what's the next one. Okay, let's read this a little bit here. I'm going to start off reading. I might call on somebody. No, I might not, but we'll see. Chapter 23, verses 1 through 3. Then Jesus spoke to the multitudes and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. He says, therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do. So yeah, you can see he's talking to the multitudes and to the disciples. Of course, the Pharisees are going to be hearing this as well. So even though he's teaching them, the Pharisees are going to overhear this. They're going to know, because Jesus is the great teacher. He's got a reputation already. They're going to be listening for this. They're going to hear things. They're going to be listening for things that they can attack him on. Remember, Jesus went to the cross because Jesus said he was the Son of God. That was not good in their sight. Okay, they're going to be listening for things so that they can crucify this man. Okay, and so, but through this, he's teaching them. And remember, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we're reading this and we're thinking it's only addressing to them, but it's learning for us as well. As we go through these things, we need to take the lessons from this for ourselves, and we're going to point out some of those things. But he says that the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. What do you think that means when they sit in Moses' seat?
The judgment seat.
The judgment seat, yep, that. And what else?
They have authority.
Authority
They
and?
represent the kingdom.
Well, they represent the kingdom, or they have authority.
Right.
And they are what?
They're in charge of interpreting scriptures.
Maybe, let me say this. I guess, I think you're on the right track. They are the teachers of the law, okay? Responsibility, the authority. And if you're saying the interpretation, meaning they're going to teach the people what it says. I get a little scared of the interpretation sometimes because it can go in different ways for different people. But they have the responsibility of teaching. And so they sit in that authoritative seat of Moses. They have that responsibility. So when Jesus said they sit in that seat, now, not everything that they say is wrong, but Jesus says, yeah, right up front, he says, whatever they say that's right, go ahead and do those things. Do the things, because they are teaching a lot of things that are incorrect, but some of the things that they are teaching are correct. So he says, yeah, in verse 4, for they bind heavy burdens that are hard to bear and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move with one of their fingers. But all their works they do to be seen of men. Okay, and we know that these Pharisees, they had the oral laws, the oral traditions. They created a lot of traditions that were outside of the scriptures. Okay, and they bound this on people. And Jesus is saying, look, don't follow those things that they're doing. You know, they won't even do these things themselves. You know, one of the ones that I have over here is the washing of hands. The washing of hands was a tradition that they established, but they bound it religiously on the people, where it was sort of a religious ceremony for them to wash their hands before they ate, okay? And we're going to look at here, when they get to the woes, what some of these binding of these religious traditions they had on these people, what Jesus said. To sort of set the flavor for some things here, let's look at Matthew chapter 15, verse 1. And Jesus addresses this washing of hands, one of these traditions that they've bound on these people. Matthew chapter 15, let's see. Okay. John, do you have an ESV?
I have King James.
Oh, no, sorry, ESV. What am I saying? Do you have New King James there?
I have the King James.
Yeah, can you read that for me? You can go 15, 1 through 9. If you got it there, please.
Then the scribes and Pharisees who were from Jerusalem came to Jesus, saying, "Why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread." He answered and said to them, "Why do you also transgress the commandments of God because of your tradition? For God commanded, saying, Honor your father and your mother, and he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death. But you say, whoever says to his father or mother, whatever profits you might have received from me is a gift to God, then he need not honor his father or mother. Thus you have made the commandment of God of no effect by your tradition. Hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy about you, saying, These people draw near to me with their mouth, and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me, and in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men."
Okay. And so Jesus turns this around on them. They go after Jesus on the washing of the hands, which is not scriptural. It's not a religious thing. And he turns it around them because they are hypocrites on these things. And we'll see over here a little bit later that they a lot of times focused on the lesser things of the law than the weightier issues of the law, the more important things of the law. In this instance here, Jesus is talking about this thing called Corban, where they were supposed to, and we are supposed to, actually it's a commandment to us as well, to look after the elderly, our parents, our grandparents and such, when they can't. But they turned around and gave the money to the temple and said, well, we don't have to take care of our parents because we've given money to the church or to the temple, right? And Jesus turning this around on them and telling them that basically, you aren't focusing on the weightier things, and you're focusing on these little things, these things that are meaningless, such as washing of the hands. This is just a tradition, it's not even religious. And so he has a scathing rebuke on them where he says, look, these people draw near to me with their mouth and they honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me, and in vain they worship me. Isn't that so scathing? When you think about yourself, if somebody says, you just honor me with your lips, you don't do anything that is substantial in helping, that is harsh, right? And Jesus turns this around on them very quickly. And in verse 10, let's keep reading then. And he says, and when he had called the multitude to himself, he said to them, hear and understand, okay? So listen to what I'm teaching you. Not what goes into the mouth defiles a man, but what comes out of the mouth, this defiles a man. Then his disciples came to him and said, do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard these sayings? But he answered and said, every plant which my heavenly Father has not planted will be uprooted. Let them alone. They are blind leaders of the blind. And if the blind leads the blind, both will fall into a ditch. There's a responsibility as well on your side. Even though there are people that are teaching you, Tim is up there teaching lessons on Wednesdays and Sundays. But Tim is not responsible for your salvation. He's merely helping you along, right? Who's responsible for your salvation?
Myself,
Yourself.
ultimately.
You have the responsibility to also go and study and to read the scriptures to make sure that those things that Tim and other teachers, including in this class, are taught correctly and are going to get you to heaven. if you are merely sitting here and sitting in there and listening, you could be doing yourself a disservice. You need to be listening to that stuff, but then teaching yourself, growing in your own knowledge. And over here, not only are the Pharisees taking themselves down, but guess what? They're taking everybody else down with them in that process. Okay? We have a lot to cover, so let's go on. Won't go too much deeper than that. Then he said in verse 15, then Peter answered and said to him, explain this parable to us. So Jesus said, are you also still without understanding? Do you not yet understand that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and is eliminated? So, eating, if you ate I'm sure all of you have eaten something with dirty hands. Most times it's really not that bad. It goes into the stomach and it's eliminated. It's not that bad. But what goes into the heart in terms of the scriptures and in terms of things that can make you evil and wicked and things like that, those are important. That's what Jesus is saying here. What goes into the heart is more important than the washing of the hands. And so he says, but those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile a man. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man, but to eat with unwashed hand does not defile a man. Okay. So you get sort of there the flavor and the understanding there of what Jesus is going to be teaching about hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is something that I know we all want to avoid if we can. Sometimes somebody might call us a hypocrite, and it might be justifiable. And sometimes they call it to us, and we might think about it and go, yeah, well, I was a hypocrite. And you try to correct that over here. Okay, let's keep going. Now, in that last verse over there, when we go back to Matthew chapter 23, he says in verse 5, and look at this, but all their works they do to be seen by men. All these things they do to be seen by men. So they're not doing these things to be humble servants of God. They're doing these things to be seen by men. And Jesus identifies 6 things here in the scriptures as we go on. He says, they make their phylacteries broad and enlarge the borders of their garments. So I just wanted to show you a picture real quick up there. These phylacteries wrapping around, you can see that wrapped around the arm as well as wearing on the head, on the frontlet of the head. Deuteronomy 6 verse 4 through 9 tells them to do this, right? But does he tell them to do actually this? Do you guys know that verse? Let's quickly jump over there. I think it's important. Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9. Let's take a quick look. Just go to 9. I think we'll run out of time, so I don't want to be. He says, only take heed to yourselves and diligently keep yourself lest you forget the things your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart. No, that's not it. 6. Sorry, I'm reading the wrong thing. Apologies. Okay, 8. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as your frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of the house of your gates. What's it talking about there when it says to bind them on your arm and wear it on the frontlets of your eyes? What's it saying about the scriptures? What should them and you do? Yeah. Well, don't forget it. Put it into your heart. Keep it in front of you all day. How many of you guys do this on a daily basis where you've studied scripture and you read scriptures and you walk around thinking about scripture? You meditate upon that scripture. And when situations come up, you use that scripture to help you in your day-to-day interactions with others and to avoid evil and unrighteousness. That's what he's talking about. If you just walk around with it on your head, sure, people are going to see you as a religious person, but maybe not a righteous person. Just wearing that thing on your head and wrapping it around your arms doesn't mean anything. What righteousness is and what Jesus is looking for and God is looking for in your lives is that you act upon these things, okay? And people are going to see that you're a righteous person by the way you act. I know it's hard. It's a challenge every day. I walk around and I'm intertwined with the world every day. But I try to think about these scriptures, and I hope you do, and I'm sure you do, thinking about that's what he's talking about, Okay? So for them, what they were doing is making these things bigger and wider. Look how righteous we are, and religious we are by these phylacteries. Okay? Next one. He says that verse 6, they love the best places at feasts, the best seats in the synagogue. And so, I've missed one, sorry. Where did I miss that one? Oh, I see. I included both of those. Enlarge the borders of their garments. They wore these beautiful garments, and much like the phylacteries, they like to make them look big and beautiful. Religious garments, so people could see when they walked around, they had these big, beautiful religious garments on them, right? To show people, to be seen of men, how they look, how they are religious. And so, verse 6, they love the best places at feasts, the best seats in the synagogue. Where typically are the best seats? Up front, yeah. So where were they? They were getting themselves up front there to be seen of men. Not that we would do this, but I appreciate the fact that we don't do this. Imagine the elders up in those two seats in the beginning at church, before church starts, they all go and sit up there and, hey, so when people come in, oh, there are the elders sitting up front, But the elders don't do that. What do? They sit throughout.
They mingle.
They mingle.
They coexist with the rest of the congregation.
They do, exactly.
They don't elevate themselves.
They don't elevate themselves, exactly. And there are religious bodies where things like that, where the leaders of the church will be seen, be up front. That's not what God wants for us. We are all the same, we just have different roles, okay? We don't want to separate ourselves. These are those, and these are these, okay? I want to get to the woes. I know this is not enough to do one, but I can't do a second week for other reasons. Verse 7, and so they love the greetings in the marketplaces. So, walking through the marketplaces, they like to be seen. Oh, there's, this Pharisee, and like to get those sort of greetings as we follow through into the next verses here, they like to be called rabbi and teacher. They like those religious titles for themselves. So when you see them, oh, yes, there's Rabbi so-and-so. You've probably even seen on movies and TV shows when you got these Jewish rabbis. What do they call them? They give them a title, right? Yeah, this is Rabbi whatever. People like that. They like to be called that. In the Mormon church, what are they called? What are the elders called? Elder Jones and things like that, if you haven't noticed. But they like that. It's a religious title for them. In fact, they even wear it on their jackets, right? Elder, major, And so that's what you're known as. You're not, I was going to call you Trevor. Michael Major. He'd be known as Elder Major, right? So he'd have himself a nice religious title. Verse 8, he says, but you, do not be called rabbi. He says, for one is your teacher, the Christ, and you are all brethren. So in this, the word rabbi means teacher in Judaism. And he's telling them, don't give a religious title like that. There's one that is our teacher. Christ is our teacher, and we have that through the scriptures. That's where we find. And I know you might refer to me today, and they might say, who was the teacher? And you'd say, well, Peter taught the class. But that's not a religious title for me. I'm just merely sort of efficient, right? Just saying I'm the teacher for the day, for this class. But they like that as a religious title. And Jesus is saying, don't do that. Don't do that. Because you are all brethren. That's what we were talking about. We are all the same in this. Verse 9, he says, do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your Father who is in heaven. And do not be called teachers, for one is your teacher, the Christ. In verse 11, but he says, but he who is greatest among you shall be your servant, and whoever exalts himself be humbled, and he who humbles himself be exalted. Okay? So this sort of ends that little section here, and if we were sort of to summarize over here, Jesus is saying, be careful. Don't give yourselves these religious titles. Don't do things to be seen of men, because they were exalting themselves. They weren't humbling themselves. The person that humbles himself or herself in the church, that is the greatest person, the one that is the servant role in the church. And that applies today as well. The one that is sort of quietly doing the work of the church, that isn't walking around getting a pat on the back all the time for the things that they're doing, are very humbly going about, quietly doing the things. Now, I know people will recognize things that you do, and they will say, thanks for this and thanks for that. That's great. But the one that's not seeking the headlines, that is the one that has the servitude role, and that's the one that Jesus is saying, that's the one that will be exalted. Okay? And when Jesus says exalted, what does that mean typically? That's the one that will be in heaven, right? The one that is humble, the one that is the servant role, exalted to be on the right hand of Christ at judgment. Christ, being the judge one day, will exalt you if you can take on that. And these have not done that. These have not done that. And so you can see how scathing this is to hear those type of things being said, that you are not humble, sir. You are not humble, and you will not be exalted one day. You would think they would correct things very, very quickly. Okay, let's get into some of these woes now. Let's say I put these on the headline there. Let's see. Oopsie. Okay. And that's the first one. Okay, the first one there, number one, is the authority to control who enters the kingdom. Just from that title itself, can you imagine that? The authority to control who enters the kingdom. Let's look at verse 13 then. He says, "But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. For you neither go in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in." And so, he says to them, you are putting yourselves in a position of deciding who's going to heaven by the things that you are teaching and telling them. Remember, they had a lot of these traditions, and they would go around and say to people, you are not following these traditions of the elders. You are not going to go into heaven. Well, are we to be judge of that? Who is our judge? Sorry? God. God is the judge, right? Sometimes people use that as a sort of a derogatory mark if you try to teach them, saying, don't judge me, you're not my judge. Well, you're not, and we hear this a lot when maybe a preacher's teaching, is that I'm not judging, I'm just showing you what's in the scriptures, right? We are not to judge. We can't be judged, but we can show the right way, the right path. And this is what they were doing incorrectly, is that they were telling people, because you're not following this and that, you're not going to heaven. And the problem is they influencing people in the wrong way. And I mentioned earlier that there is power given into the hands of somebody who is a teacher. Because if you teach incorrectly or you tell people things that are incorrect, you can dissuade them in the wrong way. You can discourage them in the wrong way. Maybe they leave the church, or maybe they don't want to study anymore. So you have to be very careful on this. So this rebuke here, that they control who enter the kingdom, this is number one on the list. And Jesus, of course, Jesus is not happy, the fact that they're doing this. The next one, actually, verse 14. Now it's in here, I'll just make a point for those that know this, is apparently this one is not found in some of the main manuscripts. Michael had spoken about that, and we don't have time to sort of go into a study on all that, but let's read it anyway. Verse 14, he says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you devour widows' houses and for a pretense make long prayers. Therefore you will receive greater condemnation." You know this has been documented in other parts of the gospel as well, of these long prayers, so people can see them making these beautiful, elegant prayers, and they are manipulating widows and taking advantage of people like this. And widows can be taken advantage of if there's no man that's there to help them, especially during those times. But Jesus says, therefore you will receive greater condemnation, okay? And we know in other parts, in chapter 23, I think Jesus addresses this as well, that there are degrees of punishment and there are degrees of which commandments we need to adhere to. Especially the one, I think of the one over here where you take people down the wrong path. Because what does it also say? Maybe somebody can bring up the scripture, I don't know where it is, but the elder's responsibility, right, in serving the church, in keeping the flock going the right way. If the elders took the church in the wrong way, what's going to happen to them compared to somebody that's not an elder? What does the Bible say about that?
We know teachers are in greater condemnation. They're, responsible for what they teach.
Yeah.
The Bible cautions individuals in becoming teachers like that, masters, because of that.
Yeah, exactly. And you guys, those that are elders, have this great responsibility to ensure, and it's the reason why, if you would notice, and I've noticed for 20-something years, there's always an elder in one of the classes here. Typically, you don't have a class where there's no elder and they all are sitting in the one. There's always one here to ensure, and I'm sure they are doing this, ensuring that the teaching, so somebody doesn't come in here and take advantage of those. Also, the teachers that are all out there. Mark has reviewed that, to review that. There's not somebody that's teaching the kids out there that's going to sway them in the wrong way, okay? There's a responsibility there to make sure that the teaching is correct. Okay, let's see, where are we? Authority in matters of the tongue, verse 16. Okay, he says, "Woe to you, blind guides, who say, whoever swears by the temple, it is nothing. But whoever swears by the gold of the temple, he is obliged to perform it." He says, "Fools and blind. For which is greater, the gold or the temple that sanctifies the gold? And whoever swears by the altar is nothing, but whoever swears by the gift that is on it, he is obliged to perform it." He says, "Fools and blind, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifies the gift? Therefore he who swears by the altar swears by it, and by all things on it. He who swears by the temple swears by it, and by him who swears in it. And he who swears by heaven swears by the throne of God, and by him who swears on it." This is quite lengthy over here, but just in brief, is they had a problem over here of making promises and oaths. And what they would do is they would say, "I swear on the temple that I'll make good on this promise." And when that obligation came ready for payment, what did they do? They would renege on it. And they would say, "Well, I didn't swear on the gold of the temple, but had I sworn on the gold of the temple, then, I would be required to make this payment." You can't trust people like that, right? Today there's a reason why we have law written down, and there's a reason why we have contracts written, even in the places that you work. You have an employment contract, or I'm sure everybody, unless you're self-employed, right? You have an employment contract that spells out what are your responsibilities and what you're going to get paid for doing those things. Because what happens if the company says, "Well, I know I'm going to pay you $1,000 a week, but we're only going to pay you $800." You say, "No, but I have an employment contract to back you up." But over there, they were swearing on things. "I'm going to swear in the temple. I'll make good on that." But then when it came good, they didn't want to do that. We recall in Matthew chapter 5, what did Jesus say about let your yes be yes and your no be no? These were part of the contrast in that Sermon on the Mount that Jesus was teaching on there. When you say, "I'm going to do something," you do it, right? That promise that you make, that oath that you make. And I know sometimes it can be tough because maybe sometimes you make a promise and you really feel like breaking it, right? Yeah, that's really mighty inconvenient for me, or it's going to cost me. But Jesus says, no. When you make a promise, and in the Bible, it teaches not to make oaths, but if you do make oaths, if you do say, "I'm going to do something," you need to follow through on it. And if you can't do that, rather say no. Let your no be no, because you need to be a person that needs to be trusted. And when we think about what we spoke about earlier, about people seeing Christian in you, this is one of the places. You do not have to wear the frontlets. You do not have to put the scripture on your arm in tattoos or bind them with leather around your arms. You do not have to wear garments to show. You do not have to have a horn on your car, bang, 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 so people can hear you, or a bumper sticker that says, I'm a Christian or something like that. You do it by your actions, and these are some of the things. You do not want to be called hypocrite. So when you stand in that judgment seat one day in front of Christ, he doesn't say, depart from me, I never knew you. You're hypocrite. You're fool. You're blind. Okay? These are one of those things. And I know, and as I mentioned, we're addressing these people here, but it's also addressed to us for our learning, to think about those things, those obligations that we get ourselves into. Let's take a look over there real quick. And then additionally, Jesus mentions over there that they also, besides the temple, they were making promises of the altar. I make a promise on the altar, but then when it came due, they would say, well, if I offered the gift, or if I promised on the offering, then that would have made due. But Jesus here says, what's more important? He says the gift or the offering on that. He's basically saying over here, if you swear on these things, you need to make good on it. There's no difference between the altar and the offering, on the temple, on the gold on the temple. Okay? If you make a promise, you need to keep it. Okay? Or don't make the promise at all. Don't make that mistake. Questions? Let's look at number 4. The authority in determining what is authority in determining what is and what is not important in God's law. Okay, let's read 23, verse 23. He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law. Listen to this. Justice and mercy and faith. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. Blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. I tell you, this is so powerful here. All these things that he's telling them, and if they were addressed to you, I think you would cry. Your heart would just melt. If somebody with such great authority, Jesus, is saying this, have you ever been dressed down by a respected school teacher or a parent, right? Or could be somebody in the church? That would be bad, It'd melt your heart. And look what he's saying over here. This goes back to the law of Moses, where they were doing offerings of some produce. And what's the smallest part of this produce is the little seeds inside there. And those are small little things. And Jesus is saying, you concentrate on these small little things. You're counting out the seeds of the offering, making sure that, they were very meticulous about giving exactly what God wanted. But on the heavier things, the weightier things, you think of those things like justice, mercy, and faith. Those are big things. In being just in the way you, deal with things and people. And how about mercy? Giving mercy. Giving mercy to somebody, I often think about this one so much. I'll tell you this because, I'm dealing with middle school and high school coaches for cross country right now, and they miss the deadline of the registration. It puts me in a bind when they do that. And I go back to Misty and I say, they're lazy. They missed it. And I know these guys because they're lazy. And then they come over there to the event and I got to manually enter these registrations. And I'm just thinking, mercy to this person, because can I give it? Because maybe they're having trouble at home. Maybe they couldn't get it in. Maybe their job is giving them a hard time. And, I'm thinking, and mercy is hard to give. It's a very weighty thing to do. But can you think about it, to give people mercy? And then on faith. Faith encompasses so much. The obligation on yourself to focus on your faith, to be obedient to your faith on a daily basis, instead of just these small little things that maybe don't even matter too much. Jesus is saying, these weightier things, these are the things you need to be focusing on, okay? And they had trouble discerning these things. This is one of the things that you need to think of is being discerning on these things, focusing on those big things, those hard things, those things that are difficult to do, right? And not just on the little easy things that you can do. Jimmy?
When you look at all these things, it's what people did for show rather than from the heart.
That's correct.
That this whole thing is what Jesus is talking about.
Yes, correct.
Our religion needs to be from the heart.
From the heart.
And not for show at all. And that's what they were doing.
100%. That's the crux of the whole thing. They were not humble. They were exalting themselves, right? And everything was for show. And look at this. He says, in terms of the gnat, you know, if you get a little, you know what a gnat is like horrible little thing, right? And you get it in your drink. You could drink that. Wouldn't be a problem. But they're going to strain out that little gnat, right? That small little thing while they swallow this big camel. Okay? Go ahead.
I also think it's really cool that he says the three that he says, that justice and mercy and faithfulness, those are the three things that he just talked about, like in order. So the first thing he talks about has to do with justice. The second thing he has talked about has to do with mercy, and then faithfulness, you know, keeping your promises. You know, I think that's cool that he puts those things in order, and then he like knows exactly what he's talking about. He's not just like riffing. He's not just improvising this. He like has everything that he's said so far in his mind still. Like he's still like he links it all together, and so then when we come back and read it, we can connect all the dots, and it's just really like masterful how he teaches.
It's absolutely masterful. I would encourage you to go back and read this slowly for yourself tonight. There are things that if you read too fast, you're going to miss. Read this slowly. We really haven't done it justice. I apologize for trying to go fast. I'm preparing for a fourth quarter class, so if Mark wanted me to go into next week to finish this, I need to get done with that class. I'm trying to make it good, is the reason why I want to get this done. And I do want to get this done in the next couple of minutes if we can. Sorry for rushing. But I do want you to go and read it for yourself. The next one is the authority to determine what is clean and unclean. He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrite, for you cleanse the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside they are full of extortion and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and the dish, that the outside of them may be clean also. And so, yeah, he's saying, you know, look at you. You are clean. You are immaculate. You look beautiful in your gown. You've probably done your hair up nicely. And your robes are nice and clean. And you walk elegantly around. Look at me. But inside, look what he says here. You are full of extortion and self-indulgence. Strong, powerful words there to say you're nothing inside, right? You may look like Hollywood elite, but inside, you're just a horrible person, right? But he says, clean up that inside, fix that heart up, get clean inside like the outside, and then you're going to be the full person, right? The hardest thing for us, it's easy for us to go and fix up our hair and buy nice clothes and drive a nice car and have a nice house and have a garden that is immaculate with mulch and beautiful flowers. But what's inside is so important for us. And guess what? That is the hardest thing to work on, right? Is that inside. It is easy to work on all those other things. You can hire somebody to paint your house and make it look nice, but you cannot hire anybody to fix your heart. You have to fix it yourself. And that's why you need to study the scriptures. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Please go ahead and read this for yourself.